off the ground. She'll move side to slow it down. That's okay. That's okay. Find my way. Find my way back home. I've got a plan. You don't know it. See the future, but you don't show it. That's okay. That's okay.
Hi, everybody. Very welcome to this afternoon's event. It's going to be very, very exciting. First of all, before I start, I would like to say a huge thank you to Sheila and all the team at Dingle Lit who have created this event, but also have given us something in the last few weeks to be very, very excited about. So we're very excited. And so what's installed for this evening is I'm going to be talking to Chef JP McMahon from Galway. And just a little bit about JP first. JP has 3 incredible restaurants, and we can talk a little bit about that later on. One of them is Michelin star restaurant. He has Cava, and then Tartar restaurant. So the next time when you do get a chance to go to Galway, we would definitely recommend that this is #1 on your list. JP himself he's just such an incredible guy. I'm fortunate that I can call him a friend for the last number of years, but he's one of these chefs that everybody looks up to, not just in Ireland, but now across the world as well. And what we're really celebrating tonight is his new book, The Irish Cookbook, from which he is going to be cooking along tonight with, he's going to be doing Dingle Pies. And we're going to get into that in a little while, just getting JP to talk you through that. So it's a chance if you want to cook along, but also if you want to just sit on your couch, having a glass of wine and listen to what JP has to say. And we're going to talk a little about the food history and the culture of Ireland. So I'm going to hand it over to JP. JP, you're very welcome to the Dingle Lit Festival.
Cheers, Mark. It's great to be a part of it.
Brilliant. How are you doing? Are you good?
No, good, or I suppose as good as one can be. I mean, at least I'm still in the kitchen and cooking. So, and like it's I suppose the pivot of so much online I think has helped a lot. And thank God this pandemic didn't happen in the 1980s, or we would have all been done for.
Yeah. So we're going to give everyone that has joined us, and everyone, you're so welcome. I know we have people after joining us from right across the world, which is itself is just incredible. We're going to dive into your book now in a second, and we're going to get you just to sort of explain what you're going to do, and to give all our viewers what we're doing here is it's for about an hour. We're going to be chatting about the dish we're going to do, looking at Irish food culture. And then if you do have questions, there is a chance through the platform that you're looking at. I will be able to look at it here through my phone, and we'll be able to pass them along to JP. So first of all, JP, we're going to be doing Dingle Pies tonight. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, funnily enough, the Dingle Pie, like I wasn't like, I came across so much when in the process of writing the book, and there's very few dishes in Ireland. I mean, when I say very few, I mean not as many as other cultures or countries that we have named dishes or dishes associated with a specific place. And so for me, like the Dingle Pie it's a great way in to Irish food culture, because it's not only about the pie and what's in it, but the fact that it is associated with a particular place and a particular fare for a long time. And for me, it was nice to see that aspect of Irish food and to learn about that. And because for me, and probably yourself as well, is like the story about the food is really, really important.
Yeah, and it really is. And like your book, 450 recipes of Irish food. And it's brilliant because it's going to open up the debate. First of all, sometimes we're left with what is Irish food? We don't have Irish food. And it's really good that now we're starting to open up the debate. And I know we're going to dive into it a little bit later, but what it's brilliant as well is like you're making something like a Dingle Pie. So hopefully there's people out there maybe from Dingle to be saying, no, that's not the way I made it or my grandparents made it. And that's what the debate is about as well. It's no different than if we're in Italy and we make a tomato salad and someone down the road puts an extra slice of garlic in it. Like now it's great that debate is going to start.
No, I think so. And for me, like, while like some people may see the book as kind of like some sort of definitive statement, like for me, the book is just the beginning. And the book is a way for other chefs and other food writers, and it's a stepping stone for other cooks to look into it and perhaps further explore food in any aspect. And whether that's like, I mean, we literally had how many sections of the book here, but like initially we had 34 sections, and I think we whittled that down to what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So there's about 20 sections in the book. And even though we had 480 recipes, when you break down those sections, we could only have 20 recipes per section. And then I realized how little space we had. So I had to pick, when it came to lamb or mutton, we had to pick 20 recipes. And of course, Dingle Pies were one of the lamb recipes, but there was many other recipes that didn't make it into it. And I think, or I hope that some people would use the book as a stepping stone and go, well, let's further explore lamb, or let's further explore pies in Ireland. I mean, you could write a whole book on pies in Ireland, and I hopefully the Irish Cookbook will just be the start of the exploration of that, or any other way.
Yeah, and it really dives into the culture of it as well. Going back to, because I think sometimes we think like ourselves that, oh, there's not a lot of Irish food, but food is about the invaders, the settlers who came here, who's living here now and how it changes. That's what a country's food, I think. And would you agree as well?
No, absolutely. And I think for me, like, all I knew at the beginning was that I wanted to start like when people first came to Ireland. And like that's roughly about 10,000 years ago. And I was always kind of annoyed when all the different cookbooks I looked at that dealt with Irish food, they all started a couple of hundred years ago, or they mentioned the Celts or the Normans, but didn't really explore their food in very much detail. And that's why I suppose you could even like Norman food or Viking food. There's so much more to explore. I mean, after writing the book, as well as before. And I think Ireland, like when you look back 10,000 years ago, there was nobody in Ireland. And so I'm of the opinion that every single person who came to Ireland is an immigrant or an invader or in whatever capacity. And so what we really see as on an island is different waves of people bringing different food traditions. And it's because there was nothing here at the outset. And so that's a complex layering. And even when you get up to the present day, we have to accept that in 50 years' time, whether it's Polish influence or Japanese influence or some sort of African influence, or even Brazilian, now we have so many Brazilian chefs working with us, that is going to seep into our own food culture, and eventually they will mix and join together, and we'll have something like a new aspect of it.
Yeah, it's so true. Now we're going to move on to your pies first of all. I'm going to get you've got pastry already made, and that's important. Yeah. So we're going to let you just explain where we are at the moment.
Absolutely. So I just made the pastry from the book. Now I always make double. I made double the recipe in the book, because if you make the recipe in the book, you'll just have enough for 4. And I always find it's nice to have a little bit extra just in case. But all the recipes in the book had to be for 4, so we kept it at that. So what I've done is it's important to make the pastry. You can even make it a day or a week in advance, and you can put it in the freezer. But I made it, and then I rolled it out between 2 sheets of greaseproof paper. And I find that's a handy way to roll pastry, because rather than trying to keep on flouring your surface and turning it around, if you roll it between sheets of greaseproof, you don't need any flour. And then you end up, I cut out circles, and then I literally shaped them a bit. I'm gonna trim them again if you want, but again, I don't think 300 years ago in the Dingle Peninsula anyone would have had a plastic pastry cutter, so we won't worry too much about the shape of them. I rolled out some tops as well and cut a little hole in them. The hole is a little bit aesthetic, but it also acts as a little chimney to let the heat out. And then I also made up a little mixture of onions, some mutton from Connemara Mountain lamb, and then also some flour nuts. So it's a basic roux with some browned off onion and lamb, and then I put in some. I actually put in venison stock because I just had stock left over. But traditionally it was made with lamb stock, and actually interestingly, the pastry was traditionally made with mutton fat instead of butter, because again butter would not have been as widely available, and also was really, really expensive. And because people had animals, people always had either beef dripping, pork lard, chicken fat, and it's something I find that people are beginning to appreciate again, and we certainly appreciate it. That when you cook with lamb fat, you get a much different flavour than you do with butter, and I think that's something probably that we need to think a little bit more. I know we associate butter with Ireland, but there's so many other fats that I think that we can explore and make our quiches with chicken fat instead of butter, and to see how that taste comes out and what way it affects the pastry.
Yeah, and I'm just going to, for those people who don't maybe have the book yet, and we'll talk about how they can get it in a while, I'm just going to read out the actual what you have, the ingredients, and I know you said you've doubled it. So there's 200 grams of plain flour sifted. There was 100 grams of cold butter cubed, or you were saying earlier on it would have been traditionally fat. 2 eggs beaten, and one of those is for brushing, and then just a pinch or a half a teaspoon of salt. And so I would imagine that you've just got those and mix it together. Now, could you explain to everyone why the cold butter is important?
Yeah, so when you're making pastry, it's a little very different to bread, and like the less you handle pastry, the better. And when you make pastry with cold butter, you get it gives you the structure of the dough. And if your butter is melted or soft in any way, you don't have you're not going to get as good as a structure. And also when you bake it, you're going to have a lot of shrinkage. And so using cold butter in that way is very similar to when you're making a sauce and you add cold butter to it. The butter keeps its structure, and it'll stay velvety.
And so the mix that you're using, so I want people to think of it that to make any pie, they're going to have to make a stew or that type of thing and cook it down the way you have. I noticed that yours is probably cold there. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, and it is important. I mean, it's not essential, but it is a lot easier to make the pies with cold stew as opposed to warm stew, because again, anything that's going to heat up the pastry is going to make it more difficult to handle. So I only made this afternoon, and essentially, I mean, it's a really basic lamb stew thickened with flour. That's what it is. And like, even though you might feel when you're making it, it's a bit different. And I'm sure there are dingle pies, or there's people watching, they can ask. I'm sure there are pies with vegetables in it. The version I made, and I can't remember where I got the original, was literally just onions, lamb, and then add flour and add stock. There was nothing else in it. But that's not to say there can't be carrots or anything else in it.
And it's so important, and it's exactly what you've said. Like, because I've come across that a lot of times myself here on the, like, there's some incredible people still make the pies, and I think they make it very similar to what you've made it, that there's very little vegetables. And I think it's up to people themselves if they want to put whatever they want in there. If they want to put a bit of bacon in there, if they want to change it up, and like, there's no right or wrong answer ever to any of these things, like, isn't it? It's about getting people cooking. And I suppose when we, like, a lot of times if we question why is there just, say, there's not a heap of vegetable or herbs and stuff, it probably goes into our own food history. So maybe it wasn't available, or maybe it just wasn't. What would your opinion on something like that be?
No, absolutely. And I think that to add, I don't know, fresh chervil to the pie is not going to detract from its dingleness or its pieness. And whether, as you said, bacon. And I think a lot of times it comes down to availability. And I think that the kind of simplicity of the recipe is probably down to the kind of Spartan nature of the cooking. And maybe there was probably other pies that had no onion in it. I mean, I put rosemary and thyme in mine, which I can't imagine would have been in every pie either. So there's like cooking cooking from necessity, and then there's cooking where I suppose you're conscious of the flavors and the different, I suppose, vegetables you can put in it. And it's very different for us cooking now, because we can go down to the supermarket and buy a packet of sage, and we don't need to worry about whether we have a herb garden or whether anyone has any of it. And so we're in a very different position, and that's why I think we should be. I mean, as long as you're making the pie, I think it's irrelevant whatever you put. If you want to put coriander into it, knock yourself out, because I think it's the act of making the pie with mutton. For me, that's the most important. It's not really about paying homage to a strict line of ingredients. And I would even argue that when it comes down to the way that paella is treated and the way that pizza is treated, particularly in the south of Spain and in Naples, I think a lot of time it detracts from the joy of cooking. I understand there are traditions, and we need to be cognizant of those traditions, but I don't think we need to be slaves to them either.
Yeah, and I even think something like the Dingle Pie, and I would love to see it on more menus. I know that you put a pie like this on tartare on your menu a lot, and why I'd like to see it is because it opens up maybe the conversation sometimes when we think there's not Irish food, but like the dish that you're making can go back a couple of 100 years. And
absolutely. And I think for me, like one of the joys of putting pies on in tartare is that, like, I mean, food, as you'll know, Mark, is very cyclical. You know, I mean, pies go out of fashion, and then all of a sudden pies come back into fashion, and they kind of almost become renewed. I do think that the pie is having a particular moment in our present day, and the chef, the British chef Callum, who has his pie book,
yes,
is very, very good.
Yeah,
and I got that for the guys in tartare and just said, look, knock yourselves out. And I mean, we have so much great game in Ireland, like venison and birds, and of course they have tender bits, but you have all these other bits that you need to cook and stew. And that's why there are things like pies, and whether that's a shepherd's pie or a dingle pie, like, I really think that we need to embrace that. And even for me now, and I know we were talking earlier on about how the book is affected Aniar and that, but I was saying to the guys recently that we need to get a pie on the tasting menu, like a smaller version of it, because we've got so into kind of thinking about lightness and dishes with little elements and fiddly things. And I was like, wouldn't it be really nice in the middle of the tasting menu to get a little mutton pie, and then to be able to talk about this as a story and with history, and then also for people to eat and go, God, that's really, really tasty and really fulfilling. And that's not to say that you don't get that in fine dining all the time, but often when we think about fine dining, we are thinking about, like, how can we make these dishes light, because people are going to be having a lot of them. But I really was thinking about pies and saying that'd be really nice to have a pie like that.
Yeah, and for any of our people who are tuned in who don't know what Aniar is, it's your fine dining Michelin star restaurant, and I think, you know, to be able to feature something like that and to be proud to put that on it, it really shows where we can take Irish food and food in general, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think what we can do is we can learn from different traditions, like the Nordic tradition. And I always interested in the Japanese tradition and how they treat fish. But that's not to say we need to ignore our own tradition. And there's nothing better than a really nice pie. I mean, whether that's a fish pie or when you go into the winter, you have mutton. And like, a pie is a seasonal, the pie itself is like a seasonal receptacle for the different foods that come. And so as you come into the spring, you can go into a nice vegetable and herb pie, and then you're into the summer. You can have fish pies, and you're into the winter with venison and mutton. And you can use that vehicle. And I think that's why the form of the pie has stayed with us so long, because it's not the content. The contents are secondary to the vehicle of putting it together.
Now, it's very interesting for what you're doing there, because it's also great to see even though you're working in a professional kitchen, you're using equipment that probably most people have in their house, in their own home. So can you just talk us through what you're doing there now, please, JP?
Yeah, so I have it on a silicone mat. If you don't have a silicone mat, you can put it on greaseproof. I just find the silicone mats, you buy them once and they can go through the dishwasher, and they're just handy, particularly because we're conscious of the environment and we don't want to keep on using stuff. And it's not that you won't ever use greaseproof. It just cuts out a little bit. I'm using the little pastry cutter, but that could be a scone cutter. It could be a cup. And I'm just kind of just trapping, using it to give it a little bit of shape. And I just brushed a bit of egg underneath. Now I am not, as you can probably see, or maybe you won't be able to see, I am not the best pie maker in the world. And I think there are pastry chefs of this world, and there are pie chefs. And it is like making a pie is an art. And it's not that all cooking is not an art, but I really think that making pies is something you just get better and better at. And I don't think before we did the cookbook, I must have made a pie a handful of times. Of course, I made like shepherd's pie and all that, and we might have made a few pies in the pub. But really, the art of the pie is something that I think that really gives back so much. It's almost like, I don't know, like playing a musical instrument, because when you get used to the feel of the pastry and the temperature of it and how much you need to put into the pie, or you put in too much last time and then you need to reduce it a bit. Like every single person who makes that recipe, it'll come out differently, because everyone's kitchen, and I never be worried about that it doesn't look like the photo, because literally every time I make it, it looks different again. And the photo is just one instance in time. And it's not that it's wrong. It's just that everyone's kitchen is slightly different. And also the pie is, and it's a nice connection to other things, like even like ravioli, and we don't consider that a pie, but essentially it is something between two bits of pasta. And pasta is a type of pastry. And so there's lots you can do. And if you have extra filling left over, you can literally just dilute it with stock, and then you'll have your stew again. Or you can pop it in the freezer, and you can make a shepherd's pie or a cottage pie, anything like that in it.
And I think as well, like, you know, the fact that the way they are, that you're not using loads of equipment, they all look a little bit different there as well. But like, I think as well, like, there's a couple of very good learning points that you've just handed out there. Like you were talking about the cold butter, working with cold filling. And the more people, I always feel as well from the cookery school, the more the people go away and try these, it's like what you said, they sort of find out themselves, but it's knowing those little tips. And that's what your book does so well as well. It gives those clear, like every every recipe seems like that it has been tested, and it's been tested so that if I've never cooked before, I can open it up and away I can go.
Yeah, and like I think we cooked 125 of the dishes to be photographed, and then there was another 50 that we just cooked to test, and then Fidon also they tested another 150 of the dishes. And so what was great was because for them the book was, Fidon are a big publisher, and the States, the America is where they sell a lot of their books, so they just had to be sure as well that, I mean, even flour is different. When I bake bread, when I'm over in Canada or the States, it always comes out different. And we made a couple of little changes, because it is important to that you have that. And I didn't do this in the photo, and it's only something I saw recently. I just rolled out little bits of pastry, and I'm going to put them over the top. And it's
Brilliant.
just like a pimped up dingle pie.
It's a nice decoration, though, and you're just taking that from the scraps what you have.
That's all, and you'll have loads. And if there's any pie makers in the audience, you can make little leaves, and like there's so much you can do, and that's why I really like it. Like you can usually make a pie in a very rough sort of way, but then you can literally make it the most beautiful art object. And as you see in England in the pie room, they're just at another level, those pies, and they really inspire you to keep on going.
I've two questions for you. The first one is, you were talking earlier on about using different animal fats. So how do you do that? Do you chop off the fat and render it down?
I would. You need to render the fat down as a solid, because it needs to go into a paste. And so if you get lamb fat, you can put it in water and just cook it. Just put it in a little bit of water in a pot, and the water will evaporate, but it will pull the fat out. I mean, most of it you can buy a jar of beef dripping or suet as well. You can there's plenty of people will sell. I think Dexter have a lot of suet
Yes.
that they sell and that. And so and again, it's another thing that like it's probably the more people go looking for it, the more we'll have of it. But unfortunately, I suppose we got out of the habit of cooking with animal fat, and it's just something that I think is it's something else I think that we can get back into. Even our brown bread. I mean, think that we never think about putting beef dripping into brown bread, but we put butter and eggs and all sorts of other things into it, and it's not that it's not a million miles away, from.
But we have to think of it as a fat. Like sometimes we forget that butter is a fat,
absolutely,
or your vegetable oil. So what you're doing there now, you're using a fork to sort of mash the two together.
Yeah, just crimping the edges because I did egg wash them, but there's a tendency to if you don't stick them together with you can do a fork or the back of a spoon. Sometimes they have a tendency to pop open when you bake them, and you can get little special forks for this. And if you're the more you get into making pies, the more equipment you'll end up with. But you can actually do it with a rolling pin and fork, and that's all you.
Or else they can buy the Aniar range when it's out.
Yeah. Whenever we get into that, whenever we get that far.
How long? And the next question there's a few good questions coming in there. Is how long can you store that in the fridge for? So I would presume, it's both. Like maybe both of them. You might be able to tell us on that.
Yeah, like I would the mixture that you make, I would keep in the fridge for 48 hours, and then I would either use it on the third day or discard it. In the freezer, it'll keep. I mean, forever. I mean, it'll lose a little bit of its taste, but certainly 6 months in the freezer. I mean, if you haven't eaten it in 6 months, then there's something wrong. And the pastry, I would say a week in the fridge easily. I mean, it's if not longer. It's only butter and flour. But I always think if you're not using the pastry, roll it up into a little ball, cling film it, and pop it into your freezer. Or if you want, you can if you have a big enough freezer, you can actually put it between two sheets of greaseproof and roll it flat. And so that means when you take it out, you're not trying to roll this ball.
So I'm going to let you get them into the oven because you.
Yeah, I'm going to pop them into the oven. We have one dodgy one here, but listen,
that's fine. You'll have that yourself.
We only need one. We only need one for the photo, and
then
we can.
There's another question started coming in, and sorry, just when you were talking about like a great way I always feel when people go to make pies, because it seems like a lot of work. Make loads and put what you have now, the ones that you're not cooking, the ready-made ones, into the freezer if you want as well. You can always put them in that way.
You can freeze the pie. Like once the pie is made, like don't egg wash it and then just put it in the freezer, and you could actually bake that from frozen. It's like. Well, it's almost like scones. I mean, I find like a lot of people always get really worried about when they make scones, and in the sense that like they're saying, well, if you make 12 scones and you do it one day, it's laborious. But like even in the restaurant, we would make like 100 scones a week, and then we would shake them all and then freeze them, and we bake them from frozen, and we add I think 4 minutes to the time, and at least that way we have fresh scones every day. But there isn't someone coming in every single morning to make 12 scones, because that doesn't happen anywhere. So I think that we forget about how to use our freezer a little bit to help us,
Yeah, and then someone is asking, is mutton coming back as a trendy meat? And it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think definitely, and I think it comes back into like the issues of sustainability, and maybe my memory is bad, but I remember mutton being very gamey, but maybe that's because I was younger. Because now when I eat it, I don't find it that different to lamb, and I don't know if that has changed. And maybe sheep farmers will be able to tell us. But possibly we've got so used to eating very young sheep that now mutton is a lot younger than it would have been.
Yeah.
Well, you have a sheep for a year, and then you have a hogget, and then you've mutton for it. So it's probably like between 2 and 3 years old or longer. But I possibly think that maybe a lot of the mutton we're eating now isn't as old as it used to be. Maybe we were used to eat 5-year-old mutton.
Maybe it's being hung better as well.
Absolutely.
You know, like when you look at some of our history, that the chances are that a lot of times, like, it was used for fuel rather for flavor rather.
Yeah, and also I think that what do I say now? The mutton. Also, I think that that the flavor now actually I think is actually nicer, because you're so used to eating lamb that has a clean flavor, and then in the end people say, oh, I really like it because it doesn't taste like lamb. Yeah. And that's like, for me, that's not a good reason to eat lamb. I really love when you eat mutton or even hogget. And I think actually most lamb now is sold as lamb actually is hogget. But I love it now when you eat it and you go, God, it's like, it's a pronounced flavor, and you go, God, that's really nice. It's hearty and
where would you recommend for the audience there, if they do want to start to get into mutton and their local butcher doesn't have it or whatever, where do they start? Do they just
I would start with your local butcher and see if he can get it for you, because again, like, he may be able to get it for you. I think also trying to check which lamb producers you have in your area, and do they sell lambs either whole or quartered or half, and can they supply it to you? And we get lamb from like Tolerance Butchers and Castlemine Farm, but generally when we get mutton, we get it from Connemara Mountain Lamb, because then we can actually say we take the whole lamb. But there's no reason why. I mean, I'm sure you've got great lamb producers down with Kerry Mountain Lamb. I'm sure there are plenty of them, like there is up in Galway or also in Achill Island as well. And I think also the guys up in Achill and in definitely in Achill, they sell nationwide. So I'm sure there are you can buy it, and all you're looking for is like a kilo of diced mutton, and then you can use it, or you can get some mutton chops. In the same way you buy any of the other ones.
And then another question there: what cut of lamb or mutton is best for pie? Like, what are we looking for?
Like, I think you're looking for something that's inexpensive, because the last thing you want to do is to put the really expensive lamb into it. So I think you're looking for shoulder. You're looking for mutton shoulder, because you're going to cook it down for an hour or two. If it's leg and you get it, and then you need to cook it less. But I wouldn't be putting in like the loin or chops or that, because I just feel that they're more expensive for a reason, because they're more tender. And then to cook them, to stew them, like you can stew them out of necessity, like if you have no other ones, because so you can actually, if you have a loin of mutton and you're going to do nothing else with it, then like absolutely stew it. But I think most of the time it's the shoulder, because that's what suits that one really. I had a little bit of pastry left over, so actually this is like I'm going to call this a Galway pie.
Yeah.
So it's like it's an open top one. So we just so we know that we christened that we made something. I don't know if there is a Galway pie at the moment, but now there is definitely one. So at least we can.
There is now, and it was in.
There is now. And we can say in 2020, we like, remember at the Dingle Lit Festival, the Galway pie was born.
Yeah, from it. And then another question, JP, and is there a low-fat version of what you've just made, or what would you recommend if there was?
God, that is a difficult question. I would say there's like a lamb salad, but I don't know if that's being tongue-in-cheek. I always like, and it's not that I don't. I mean, sometimes I eat pastry and sometimes I eat bread and sometimes I don't eat it. I think often, I mean, for me, when you want to consume less, whether it's less calories or less fat, I think rather than, and this is my own personal opinion, rather than taking fat out of something, so we take fat out of milk or we take fat out of butter, I would just rather not consume it, in the sense of having a salad or having less bread, because I really think that once you start extracting fat and that, the process ends. I think what you end up is a more processed product.
Yes.
And I think that again, that's just me. And I think that personally, if you're looking for like low fat pastry, I think that you should really just like make the pastry and enjoy it on the day you're enjoying it, and then on the second day just say, I had pastry yesterday, so I'm not allowed to have it today.
Yeah,
and
and
then
that's
have your, and look, that's the way I operate. And don't, like, literally, I'm a great man for the yo-yo diet, as most chefs are. You go, you eat loads of something, and then you feel guilty,
yeah.
and then you don't eat bread for a week, and then you're going to need some bread, and then you eat the bread again. And that's definitely, it's hard when you're surrounded by food all the time. But I really think that that having a lighter dish when you want something that has less fat in it, and whether you're going to cook mutton and serve it with a really nice salad, and leave out the pastry element. That's, I mean, for me, that's how you could make it. You could make less fat in it. Because if you take the fat out of the pastry, you're going to have to put something else in there, which for me is there are plenty of other.
But the fat is also functional as well in the pastry, isn't it?
Yeah, and you'll end up with something like that is how do you say, like some chemically produced alternative that will have to be, like, that will keep the structure and all that. And like it I don't know if it'll end up in the long run whether you'll be any better or any happier. But like, you can absolutely warm up like the contents of your pie and like put a load of nice winter leaves on it, and there's like a load of rocket, and then grate some hazelnuts over it. And there's nothing. I mean, because I literally done the whole no carb thing for long enough that I'm an expert at taking out bread and pastry out of things, but still eating the contents of them. So I can definitely do that.
The flavor. And then there was one question, and it's very good. It's about the hole that you put on the top of the pastry. So the little hole that you put on it, does it have to be a big hole, or can you pierce that with a knife or your fork? Or why did you do that?
You can prick the whole thing with a fork, and as long as you have space for the air to come out, because the mixture is going in cold and it's going to heat up, so it will expand. And as it expands, it'll push the pastry out. So traditionally, people have left a little chimney, and sometimes you might see it when people make pies. They'll actually make a little tinfoil chimney and put the little tinfoil chimney in it, and it's just to let the hot air out, and so the temperature doesn't affect the pastry as much, because if it goes in hot and then it gets hotter, generally your pastry will suffer, because it's a difficult thing to be putting something that stays together best when it's cold, and you're trying to get it into the oven and get it out again and still maintain its structure.
Brilliant. And I've one or two more questions before we dive into your book, because I want to have a good chat about your book. And it's one there, can we freeze the pie before cooking? And I think you sort of gave an idea on that one. Yeah, absolutely.
Once you've made the pie, you can absolutely freeze them. And also, even there's another one, because some people might be comfortable like in terms of rolling and making the pies. You can have, if you have a dish, like say for example this one, you can just put your pie mixture in and just make a lid, and like plenty of places do that, and it's not any inferior. It's just a different style of pie, and you get a lot of British pies that will actually just be a nice lid. And so even if you don't get to make both sides of it, absolutely, you can just cover it. You can egg wash the sides and wrap the top of it in pastry, and then you'll break into it. And it's another really nice way of doing it, particularly if you want to make them much larger.
Brilliant. And Dan, because we're going to dive into the book, and it's going to dive into some of the questions that were asked there as well. And for anyone if they've just joined us, what we're having a look at, we're talking to Chef JP McMahon from Galway, and this is the book. And like, I feel like I was quite excited when I knew about it, like when you were telling us about it, when it was in the working. But like, it's more than just a cookbook. It's all about the history of Irish food. Where do you see Irish food right now?
Like, I see it on, like, I suppose the crest of a wave or something. I mean, you have to view it two ways. I mean, if we view Irish food nationally, I think nationally it's a lot. The story is a lot further on than it is internationally. And so I think nationally we've been working on Irish food for the last 10 or 15 years in a very concerted way. That's not to say there wasn't great pioneers like Myrtle Allen and Jerry Galvin and people like Georgina Campbell and the McKennas, who were all throughout the 80s and the 90s were plugging away. But I think in a very in a very holistic way, Irish food has kind of blossomed. And even the fact that you go to Electric Picnic now and you have a theatre of food. I mean, at that level, nationally, we have a great conversation around food. And for me, to take it to the next level now, what we really need is we need more people who are coming to Ireland to come to Ireland and know, oh God, Ireland's a great place for food. Because we get a lot of people who know Ireland's a great place for hospitality and for its scenery. And people do go, yeah, the food is nice, but we really need to cement that further. And I think that hopefully the book, which is published with Phaidon, who are an international publisher, you can buy the book in Australia, you can buy it in like Florida, you can buy it in Alaska. Like, so like a lot more people will learn about Irish food. And I think we need to be more cognizant and confident ourselves. And so people who are watching need to say, like, yeah, there is an Irish food culture and we can talk about it. And when people visit us, we don't have to say, oh, apologize for it or be sorry. And I think that we need to move beyond that. And I think that's the next stage for me anyway, is delving deeper and deeper into the subject. And then hopefully in the next 15 years that we will have a lot more food tourism, a lot more agri-tourism. I mean, people coming to visit farms, whether it's a shellfish farm or a traditional land farm. I mean, all of these things I think are important.
Yeah, and it's like you really, like when you look through the book as well, like there's probably a lot of sort of recipes in there that maybe we mightn't have presumed they were Irish beforehand. Like say there's loads of ones there with spices in there and you go, wow, I would have never thought that as Irish. How would you sort of explain all of those type of dishes?
Absolutely, and it's something I struggled with at the beginning, and even though you mightn't think about it, because when you make everyone who makes their Christmas cake will put allspice or nutmeg or cinnamon, and we mightn't even think about it. But for me, coming at the book from the perspective of Aniar, it was like we've never used spices in Aniar. We didn't use lemons or limes or all these things that we wanted to leave out because we felt they weren't Irish. When it came to writing the book, I was like, well, how do I fold this into the narrative of Irish food and still feel comfortable with it? And I suppose for me, it was that the historical angle, and that like spices have been in Ireland, I'd say at least 1,000 years. If you go back to the Norman invasion, and possibly Vikings may have brought spices to Ireland because they were great traders. I mean, Vikings possibly may have brought red wine and olive oil to Ireland in the 8th and 9th century. So if you go back that far and say there was a possibility that it was there, then we can't really say, well, they're not part of the Irish food. So I took a very broad view of Irish food in the book in the end and said, if someone had cooked it on the island, then it has the possibility of making it into the book. Now, there were some things that didn't make it into the book because we still can't accept them. So like we were talking about Italian food, and my father was making lasagna since the 90s because everyone went crazy on Italian food, and with Ireland made it into the World Cup. And my first job when I was 15 in 1992 or 93 was in an Italian restaurant. And that we're still not used to like having that a part of Irish food. But at the same time, we can accept something that's been here 50 or 60 years. Like saffron is a really good example. Like saffron is a spice that we put into paella. But it was great to see that it was used to make buns in the 19th century. And there's a saffron bun recipe in the book. And the funny thing is, and maybe it's something particularly Irish, is that when it first came over, that we used it to dye our clothes. And if you had yellow clothes, you were well off. And so we had this spice, and I don't know why there wasn't a chef around to say, maybe we could put it in the stock.
Yeah,
but it was like, the lads were like, no, we'll dye our clothes with it first.
But I really think the book, and I think I really wanted, and I would imagine that's why you wrote as well, it's going to really open our minds to start sort of realizing there's no right or wrong as well, that it just because it was, it doesn't seem like a typical Irish dish. Maybe it was baked 20 years ago or 2,000 years ago. It still can make it an Irish dish.
Yeah, and I think that for me, the spectrum and like the likes of like our own Nordic Japanese influence, for me, it was important to put that into the book in some capacity, and not to be, and to still have it, I suppose, resonate with Irishness. So there's a dish with and
could you just explain that, just the Nordic cuisine, what you mean by that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, Nordic cuisine, I suppose, it goes back to new Nordic cuisine goes back to, I suppose, 2005, when Nordic chefs decided to look at their own produce to try and bring about a new cuisine that will be different from French cuisine, or different from Italian cuisine, or different from Spanish cuisine. Because as we know ourselves, French cuisine has been so strong. And even if you look at fine dining in Dublin in the 1950s, if you went out for dinner and it was a fancy restaurant, it was a French restaurant. And that was still the case in Copenhagen. So a lot of chefs like René Redzepi or Christian Puglisi or different chefs all decided, like, how do we look more into our own, I suppose, Nordic tradition? And that the foraging comes back in a lot, and the use of wild herbs and seaweed and all of that stuff comes in. And that was probably one of the backbones to opening Aniar, was that how do we investigate Irish food in this new way? And of course it's quite a Puritan, or quite a Puritan approach to throw out the past and to say, well, look, we're not going to use spices, we're not going to use lemon, we're not going to use black pepper. But I had to struggle with that. I don't think not too many people have like nightmares about how am I going to put black pepper in an Irish food cookbook. But like for me, that was a difficulty, and I was like, how do I get this in without upsetting A, myself, and B, annoying the guys in the near? But I didn't put it in everything, but I put it in at times. And someone actually asked me, saying, why do a lot of your recipes not have black pepper? And for me, it's about, I think, from not using it in Aniar, I could say I appreciate it a bit more now. And when I use it, I use it. And when I don't use it, I don't use it. And that's because I think we just became accustomed to putting salt and pepper together, and that's a very French tradition again, to put it on everything. And really, as Thomas Keller says, like, salt is a seasoning that amplifies the flavor of food, and black pepper is a spice that changes the flavor of the food. And it's a mistake of history why black pepper is so predominant. It could have been cumin, and it could have been coriander seeds, and it could have been many, many other things. And,
but it goes back to us to really question our food, and I think that's what your book does a lot, is like, and again, I would always hope anytime we cook in the cookery school that people take our recipes and they chop and change it to make it whatever way suits themselves. There's one question in there, JP, and it says, it just asks, if you were to sort of give 3 dishes that you would say that are either an Irish dish or that you must know, what would you recommend? Or is it a very hard thing to do?
Sorry, I'm just checking the pies. They're 2 minutes away. Like, if I had to pick 3, I would probably pick 3 different dishes from 3 different time periods. And so I think some type of pie would probably be a good example. Some type of pie or stew. And then that way you can cover a lot of different bases. I think shellfish for me is very, very important, and it's often been neglected. And I think one of the ones that I was going to show you is on page 103, is that there's a scallop dish with raw apple and kohlrabi, and it's just a really simple dish with like circles of scallop and kohlrabi. And for me, it was important to put something like that in the book, even though people would look at that and go, like, what's really Irish about it? Every ingredient on the plate is Irish for one thing, but we also have a great tradition of scallops, and to eat them raw is amazing. And again, for me, that's probably a dish that looks towards the future as well as the past. And then probably a third dish would be, I'd probably take a cake or something like carrot cake, which again seems like the most simplest thing in the world, but you got to think that it's carrots, which again grow well in Ireland, and then a host of spices. And you could take any pastry, like even the hot cross bun, which is a great tradition in Ireland. But I'd probably pick the carrot cake, and I actually put one of my Auntie Peg's recipes into the book, and that was important for me as well. I didn't want it to become like the reason for the book, but I said it was important to get some family recipes and to put some of them in to show like my own personal history, because everyone will have a different food history. And and I mentioned this a few times in the book. My friend Laura, who grew up in the Midlands, like she grew up eating game and her father fishing and having like fish like trout and pike and different stuff. And I didn't grow up with that tradition, even though we're both the same age and we both grew up in the same Ireland. So I think it's important that we see like that there are multiple different ways of looking at it, even in the same generation. And it's important not to say that my one is correct, or the one that I didn't eat fish growing up because of like whether it was the church or Good Friday or anything like that. That was, if fish was seen as kind of like something you didn't want. But there are plenty of examples where you'll find that people did have fish and did really enjoy it. And I think the book for me was important to try and bring those different stories together and put them all on the same plane, where you have people eating seaweed in Sligo, but I didn't grow up eating seaweed. But that's not to say it's not part of Irish food.
Yeah, completely. Now, we've only a few minutes to go. We're going to wrap it up now in a few minutes. The pies have been in the oven for how long, JP?
I'm just going to take them out because they're brown. I think they usually take about half an hour. Now, I wasn't keeping an eye on the time, but I think that I probably had it in the oven a little bit hotter. So it's usually about 180.
The temperature of your oven is 180 degrees Celsius. Is that correct?
Yes, at 180. And what you can do, I'll just go over and get my...
And that's 350 degrees Fahrenheit, if there's anybody that uses a Fahrenheit.
Yeah, and like what I'm going to do is, like, you don't have to do this, but I'm just going to check the internal temperature of the pie, which is not essential, because I'm not worried about food poisoning because the mixture's already cooked. But it's up at 72. And all I'm really interested in there, it's not a bacterial thing. I'm just interested that it's hot. Like anything over 65 will be warm and hot. So it's like if you're worried about the pie being cold in the middle, really, like a rare steak is 50, and the mixture is already cooked. So everything is cooked. So you can, if you want to cook it to 50 or 55, you can absolutely do that. But anything over that is done. I'd have to work on my little circles because the pastry came up a bit.
It's probably the first time, I'd say. The one good thing about doing virtual demos is, and I'm sure you'd share this as well, like, this is usually the most scariest part when you look out into the audience and there's 50 people with your 4 pies and they all think they're going to get fed, isn't it?
So like, it's nice little crust, and because the egg will give that, and it's so like in terms of I give myself a 6 out of 10. You know, I mean for effort. I'm a bit what's the word? Strict with myself. So I go home now and take 2 points off just when people aren't looking at me and go, that was a 4 really. But like for me, it's about like making bread and pies, and you'll know this, Mark, from the cooking class. It's not you really have to be doing it every day. It's not something like you can just pop into, and it's a skill with your hands. It's almost like carpentry. And when you move dough, and you really have to work that every single day, and Andy, who's one of our chefs in Tartar, makes the pies there every day, and like it's.
But that's also the joy of it, though, like, because there's like, it's a learning as well, and it just means when you make those that if your pies turn out better than mine, it doesn't matter. Like they're going to be tasty. Now, some people around here might have served those in a bowl of broth. Then they might have had the actual broth and pop them into it.
And I think that's for me, that's the most amazing thing about that. I love that, like, because normally you think of a pie, you think of having it in a restaurant, and I love that story, and I put it into the book that people would have dipped it into, because I suppose it ends up as a bit dry, and why you want to give it more moisture, and dip that into a broth and eat it at a fair, as the story goes. I mean, I really like that, and I think the more stories that we can fold onto our food, and whether it's eating potatoes by the fire out of a particular basket, or dipping dingle pies into a broth at a horse fair, any of those things I think really is what cements our food story, and what gives us more confidence, because like we're great storytellers, you know, and I think that we need to just fold that into our food.
Brilliant. And we're going to wrap it up there now, JP. But before we do that, I'm just going to hold up the book, and that's the book there. It's the Irish Cookbook. For any of the viewers or any of the audience there, you can go on to the bottom of the link, and there is a discount that you're offering today, JP. Isn't that correct?
We are. It's not as good as Amazon's discount, but listen, we're giving 20% off just for the Dingle Literary Festival. So I think the book retails at 45, and we're doing it at 36. So I think the link is up there. It's Aniar Restaurant / I think cookbook / promo or that. But you can click on the link, and then I'll sign the book, and we will post it out to anywhere in the world. And again, it's one of the great things that has kept us going over lockdown as well, is that the book had come out, and we made a special effort of actually trying to sell the book ourselves, because we didn't have a restaurant to I suppose to bring in income. So it also made us pivot in different ways. We almost turned into a little bookshop. And I just have our Galway pie that's just come out, and I'll just show you the Galway pie. So it's an open top Galway pie. Actually, I'm pretty happy with that. So I think now that'll definitely be something we'll do in the future. I'll do a picture. I'll take a picture of both, and I'll see which one wins.
So just before we go, JP, I want to say huge thank you. Now, I could talk to you for hours. I know I have before, that we've just spent hours talking, but a massive thank you for giving up your time to talk to us here and to inform us about so much, about all our food history, and congratulations on your book. Like, I really feel if there's anybody going to buy one cookbook this year, that's the one you buy, because it's not just a cookbook. There's so much history in there. There's so much knowledge, and it's a book that you can just pick up and read any page and learn something from it. There's over 450 recipes in it. To put that into context, that means if you cook a dish a day, you'll be still cooking from this book in March 2022, I think, something around then. So JP, thanks so much. And we can't wait till we do see you down here. And then for anybody who wants to follow JP, you've got Twitter, you're on Instagram, you're on the TV. You probably can find you anywhere. So where's the best place to find you?
Either in the restaurants or on Twitter or Instagram, Mystery Galway, and I check. I'm like a teenage girl. I'm addicted to it. So I'm not on TikTok yet, but my 12-year-old and 8-year-old are trying to get me on TikTok. I posted a few videos, but I'm struggling with it. So they said, like, Facebook is for old people, and Instagram is like, just old things. So that's where I am. I'm turning into one of the older people, but I love getting ideas and that from social media, particularly Instagram, because all the photographs and that, and I think it's a great part of the Irish food experience at the moment.
Brilliant. So thanks so much, JP, for your time. And then for all the audience, thank you so much for joining us. Massive thank you to Sheila and all our team behind the Lit Fest. We do know that Gabriel Byrne is coming up next. So
he's in the restaurant at the moment. I'm going to bring him on now. I'm going to bring Gabriel.
You've got to feed him first of all. So we're going to leave it there. So thanks, JP. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.